some, moderate disease resistance, but they are open pollinated. So we can confidently save seed from binary giants from year to year and expect to get some, these same characteristics: large blooms, strong stems. However, the picture on the left, this is an F1 hybrid called Uproar Xenia, okay? And if we cannot collect, well, we shouldn't collect the seeds from this plant because they are not going to come back true to type. So some distinct characteristics of this plant: even larger blooms, a very vibrant, they call this rose, but it's more like a lilac-y purple type kind of color, but very bright, very vibrant. Also has good disease resistance, so some really nice hybrid vigor qualities that we're not going to get out of, say, those binary giants. So we would not want to save seed from our uproar zinnias. We would need to purchase those seeds every year. We could save seed from our binary giants every year. I'm going to throw one other little sciencey piece in the mix. So have you ever saved seed from plants that you love, continued to plant those seeds year after year, continued to collect from that same batch of plants year after year, and you notice that you're actually losing some of those qualities that you admired in that flower? Maybe the mix of color is becoming less and less. Sometimes we'll see in open pollinated plants that the dominant colors can override the genetics of some of the other colors in mixes if we're not controlling the pollination within those cultivars. So let me show you a picture. Hopefully this will make a little more sense. So folks who are raising plants that are going to be harvested for their seed, for our seed companies that we purchase our seeds from, even if a plant is open pollinated, they are using isolation structures or different types of methods of isolation to help ensure that the genetic mixing that's happening during pollination is happening within that designated cultivar. So I'm not sure what's being grown in this picture right here on the right, but we'll just say zinnias, for example. Maybe they have binary giants here. Maybe they have Oklahomas here. Maybe they have cut and come agains here. They want to make sure that the pollen from our binary giants isn't being picked up by pollinators and brought over here to the Oklahomas, okay? Because that can muddy the waters, if you will, year after year after year. So that's why we can see changes in our own home gardens from long-term seed saving. It's because we're not really controlling that environment like our seed growers are. So if you wanted to do this on a smaller scale at home, you could certainly use some little tents here. You can just pop a tent over a particular plant. You want to make sure that that's secure down at the base so that pollinators can't get into that tenting area. And then what's going to happen? We're going to have to do manual pollination, right, to make sure that the pollen moves around and those flowers do actually become pollinated. Another good method is this example right here where they've bagged the blooms on a tomato plant. And again, this may be a little too deep for today's discussion, but some plants have the ability to self-pollinate. That means the pollen from their own flower can fertilize the ovules of that same flower. And tomatoes is one of those. So if we bagged this flower and walked by every couple days and gave it a little shake, that would be plenty of agitation to help move the pollen from the anthers to the stigma to ensure pollination. So lots of different methods and tactics used here, but the main thing I want you to take away from this is that in your home garden, you can certainly save seeds from open pollinated plants because they will come back true to type, but every 3 or 4 years, refresh your seed stock by ordering in some new seed and including those in the mix. And that's just going to help ensure that you routinely year after year are getting those preferred characteristics, okay? And number 2, don't attempt to save seeds from hybrid plants because you will be disappointed, okay? All right, so let's move on. Let's talk about our second point. Where can I find these seeds? And I know to an experienced gardener, sometimes this seems like a silly question. You're like, well, we follow the flower, right? That's right. But everyone doesn't always know that. And sometimes it can be tricky because what we think is the flower may not be the flower. So let's talk about that for a minute here. So we're going to start out by talking about some different flower structures and how we can follow that flower to the origin of the seed. Okay? So we're going to start with simple flowers. These, when I say a simple flower, that's exactly what I mean. We've got one flower. You can follow that flower down to where it attaches to the plant, and that is where we need to start our investigation for seed formation. Okay, I'm going to use my little. I hope that you can see my arrow on the screen here. So this is a 4 o'clock. And this is one of my favorite pass along plants in an old timey home garden. And you can see here we've got these sexual parts that are sticking out of this funnel shaped tubular bloom here. Okay. So once this gets fertilized, that pollen moves down the pollen tube. Where does it go? It goes to the base of that flower. This is where the ovules are located. Okay. And this is where seed development happens. In this particular example, 4 o'clocks, every one flower of a 4 o'clock is going to make one seed. And that's because this flower has one ovule at the base of it. Okay. We can have other types of simple flowers that bear multiple seeds per bloom if they have more than one ovule. And that is why I included this picture here again of a tomato bloom. It is a very simple structure flower, but as the ovule begins to mature, that turns into a fruit in this case. Inside that fruit, we have several chambers with multiple ovules. So that's how the fruit of our tomato bears many hundreds of seeds from a simple flower as compared to this 4 o'clock here, which bears us only one seed. But always remember, we're starting with that showy part of the flower, the bloom, and following it back to where it comes in contact with the plant. All right. And I took some pictures over the years in my gardens. So as we go through this, hopefully you'll get a little bit of enlightenment. You know, folks are always like, well, if I just knew what the seed looked like, that would help me on my investigation. So hopefully you'll be able to get familiar with a lot of different seed types today. So here's this bloom. It's fading. It's withering. You follow it back to the base. See, it's that swollen ovule here, and that develops right into one big seed. These are super easy to collect. I just kind of tip the branch over into my hand or a bag or a bowl, whatever I have with me out in the garden that day. And once they're mature, they just fall right out. So a nice, easy, clean seed to collect. Okay, let's move on to a different flower type. So things can get a little more confusing here. We have a lot of umbel type flowers in our home gardens. The majority of these belong to the Apiaceae family. So these are flowers that are in the carrot family. Think of dill, fennel, docus, and the list goes on. And we're just going to look at a few of these today. So this is a picture of the bloom on a dill plant. And these long stems right here, this is called a pedicel. They all originate from one common point. So you've got the primary stem, you've got this common point, and from that common point, we have pedicels that elongate into a kind of an upside down umbrella shape. And that's where we get this word umbel from. And as we go along, we're going to be able to see a little more description, a little more detail, I guess you would say, of these umbels. So the picture that we're looking at here is of a flower called Magus, and this is one of my most favorite cool season annuals in the home garden. It's really easy to direct seed, but you can tell from this umbel structure that it is related to fennel. It is related to Queen Anne's lace, which falls into this category. But in this particular one has a little more open structure, very very similar to the structure of dill. And so sometimes people call this white dill. If you're looking in seed catalogs, you may see someone refer to it as white dill for a common name. This particular cultivar that I grow is called Graceland. And here's that pedestal I was telling you about. Right here, you can really see how it's coming from that common point. And then when we get to the end of that pedestal, we actually have a umblet. This is a compound umbel. So then you have another mini umbel at the end of this primary pedestal, and that same process happens over again. Once this particular flower begins to mature, that umblet begins to close up. And this is a tactic that the plant has in its nature to help preserve those seeds and allow them time to fully ripen and mature before they're released out into nature, right? To naturally reseed itself, be harvested, but from birds and carried around. So I just thought that was kind of a neat little trick that this plant does, and it varies from some of the others. So you're going to notice here, this is another plant in this umbelled bloom shaped family. This is Ami Visnaga, or green mist. It has a denser flower head, so much denser than the white fennel or even the wild Queen Anne's lace that we see growing on the side of the road. And it is also a compound umbel. Hopefully you can see right here. Here's your primary pedestal, and then you've got your secondary umbel right here. And this plant, when it begins to mature, the entire umbel closes up. So it has an even stronger strategy to ensure that the seed actually reach maturity before they are allowed to disperse out into nature. This is a plant that you might not be familiar with. It's called Buplurum, but a lot of folks are, getting interested in growing cut flowers, and this is a really nice filler for early spring into summertime. And it's the yellow flower that we're looking at here. I had a couple things kind of growing all together. It was hard to get a picture of it alone, but this is the bloom, and the bloom itself is insignificant, but when they are grouped together in mass, and on these long stems, it's really used for a nice foliage type filler, kind of accent plant in arrangements. But I wanted to show you what those seed heads, as these blooms mature, what they look like. So this, again, is an umbel, but it's a little different than the others that we've looked at this far. As they mature, you can see here that they're kind of held like a cup. So it doesn't close all the way up like the others that we looked at, but it does cup itself and kind of clasps those seeds inside those sepals there around the edge, or those are actually bracts. But yeah. So let's look at another example that I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with. This is an allium, and it is perennial, but also reseeds itself generously in my garden. And it is a really wonderful kind of spiky accent plant, and it can get a bit weedy if you let it reseed too much, but I just try to stay on top of it so that I can enjoy it for all the other aspects that I like of it as well. However, this is not in the Apiaceae family, even though it does have an umbel-shaped bloom. So I just wanted to throw that in there, right? Not all umbels are in the Apiaceae family, but many of them are in our home gardens. So this is actually in the Alliaceae family. That includes like onions and garlics, et cetera, et cetera. So again, you can see all of those pedestals are originating from an original place of origin, and we have seed developments on the very end, super similar to the Buplurum that we just looked at. And this is they're pretty blooms when they're flowering. And one thing I do want to point out, I don't think that you can tell really well from this picture, but it is not a compound umbel. So in this situation, we have the primary pedicels and one flower on the end. In the others, we had a primary pedicel, secondary pedicels, and then lots of flowers at the very end, okay? And in these alliums, we have a primary pedicel, one flower producing seed, okay? Some of you may have some perennial alliums in the garden, and I wanted to throw this picture in here just so you didn't get confused. The majority of our perennial alliums are hybrids, and they are not prolific seed producers. So you'll have very little seed produced. You would not have to worry about this perennial allium, crossing any kind of genetics with your annuals, because for the most part, they are sterile. Okay, so let's move on to another flower type. And this one encompasses a large group of plants that we have in our home gardens already. And the plant that I really love to demonstrate the concept of a composite flower is the sunflower. I feel like it's recognizable. Everyone can relate to sunflower. And so that's where we're going to start. So if you think about that word composite, what does that mean? Composite essentially means many to make one, okay? So one entity made up of many things. Think of composite board, for example. Maybe that'll help you understand that. But when we're looking at a sunflower, imagine the head of that sunflower. All this disc area is what we call this. So we've got the disc here. We've got petals around the edges. Did you know that every single one of these, here's one, here's one, here's one, here's one, these are all individual flowers. So inside the disc of this one sunflower bloom, we could have hundreds of individual flowers, hundreds, okay? These, in the case of sunflowers, they begin to mature on the outside edges and they mature towards the inside. So we have different stages of development in this flower, and we're going to see that in several of the other types as we move forward. But as these flowers, see here, right here, here's our anthers coming out, here's our stigma, and so that's where pollination is happening. We have our insects here feeding all over the top of this bloom, moving pollen from one flower to another. Pollinators love the plants in this family because they are super efficient for them. They can visit these plants, get high loads of nectar from all of the many flowers they're visiting, and then at the same time being really efficient pollinators. So the family that we're focusing on for the majority of our composite type flowers is called the Asteraceae family. And it's a huge family. It includes sunflowers, asters, goldenrods, veronicas. The list goes on and on. Bee balms. And we're going to look at a lot of those today. And some of these plants, you're going to think, how can those plants be related? How can they be in the same umbrella of a family called Asteraceae? And the common denominator is that they share composite flower structure. They may not always be arranged similarly. They may not be in a disc flower arrangement like we're looking at here, but the general concept of many to make one holds true. And so that is how they are all related. Okay, and then you can see here, as each of those flowers begins to mature, every single one of them turns into a seed. And that's where our sunflower seeds come from. Okay, let's move on. So take that same concept from the sunflower and kind of layer that on top of your existing knowledge of black-eyed Susans. So same situation here. We have disc flowers in the center. We have ray flowers on the outside, okay? Petals, those are called ray flowers. I may not have said that before. And as this plant gets pollinated and begins to mature, it's going to turn into kind of a dry, papery structure like this. Okay. All we have to do to separate those seeds from that head is kind of rub your thumb over it, and you're going to get those seeds. Once this seed head is completely dried down, they're going to pop right out. Okay. And you're going to have a little trash mixed in there too. But don't worry. Most of these seeds are going to kind of be separated by a little thin, papery sheath. The remnants of the quote unquote flower that matured and moved forward as that seed began to develop. So it's important to know where you're looking. Okay. We're going right to the center of those disc type composite flowers to find those seeds. Okay. Here's another great picture. This is common perennial black-eyed Susan, Rudbeckia fulgida, in the garden. And you can see it has reached full maturity. I think we probably already had some bird visitors here feeding on these seed heads. I like to leave plenty out in the garden to support our wildlife through the fall and winter. But of course, always like to collect some for myself as well. Another thing I didn't mention is this talk today is kind of a mix of annuals and perennials. We can save seed from both. The strategies for germination are going to be different. When that's a whole nother talk. Maybe we could talk about that at a later time. But know that you can save seed from annuals and perennials alike. I threw this picture in here because I wanted you to see how many different types of, these composite daisy-shaped flowers you probably have growing in your garden, and you just may not have paid close enough attention. But I wanted to put these all together so that you could see every single one of these. We're going to go straight for that disc, that cone section right in the middle. So this is that Rudbeckia fulgida. This is Rudbeckia subtomentosa, or some people call that a sweet cone flower. It has little skinny yellow petals. This is from the, Rudbeckia laccionata, I think, is the species name for that. That's your cut leaf cone flower. It gets pretty tall, blooms late in the summer into fall. Really beneficial for our pollinators, our late season pollinators, and birds as well. And then this is a silphium from cup plant, which can be quite weedy. So if you allow it to go to seed, make sure that you're cutting those seed heads off before they dry out and disperse themselves, or you will have them everywhere. But they're native. All of these are native and wonderful for our wildlife. So, and have very common flower structure. So that's why I included it here. Okay, still in the composite family, a similar flower structure, but things are looking a little bit different when we start talking about Echinacea purpurea. This is our purple cone flower. It's one of my favorite perennials for mid-summer color, and it is super, super easy to collect seed from this plant, but oftentimes people don't know where the seeds are on these either, and it can be a little deceiving because we keep saying, follow the flower back to where it attaches to the plant. If we do that, you may actually be trying to investigate something that's happening down here up underneath where this primary area is. So just know that this cone that is developing right here in the center is your disc. Just, very similar to what we just talked about for our Rudbeckias. And every single one of those are maturing into seeds. This is one individual seed. This is one individual seed. So you can see how one cone is going to may produce hundreds of seeds if that flower is large enough. Again, super easy to collect. Run your thumb over the top of that cone, and you have little to no trash associated with our Echinacea seeds. So that's one struggle that you won't have to deal with, that you may have to spend a little time with on your Rudbeckias. We'll talk about cleaning at the end. Another favorite type of family plant in this composite group is bee balm. I just love Monardas. I've got 4 or 5 different species here in my garden. This one is the one most folks are familiar with, the big red bloom. That's Monarda didyma. And man, they are gorgeous. But did you know, yes, The petals around the outside are beautiful and attractive. But did you know that every single one of these little tube-shaped structures in the center, they are all individual flowers that come together to make one bloom structure here. So every single one of these is a flower. And what do? We follow the flower back to origin. So once that's dried out, I think you can see here all these teeny tiny openings right here. Those are the openings to each one of those tubular shaped flowers. It's going to be tricky to get those seeds out, but I'm going to show you some tricks here at the end. This is another good example. This is an annual bee balm, Monarda citra odora, or lemon bee balm is what I call it, a common name. Like to include these in cut flower arrangements as well. It has a wonderful light lemony scent, and as those blooms mature, very similar structure to the Monarda didyma that we just looked at. I pulled out one of those tubular flowers so you could see what it looks like on its own. I just pulled it right out of the center there, and you can see these teeny tiny seed that I've shaken out of that seed head. So we're just going to turn it upside down and give it a little shake, and when they get really good and dry, you can actually hear them. Here, let me see. I have one right here. Let me see if you can hear this. I don't know if you can hear that. I can hear it. And I also spilt seeds all over me when I did that. That's okay. All right. So here's another that is wonderful for our wildlife and pollinators. This is pycnanthemum or mountain mint. It is also in that composite family. And if you look closely, at first glance, you maybe don't notice, but if you look closely, every single one of these structures right in the center is its own individual flower. And then, of course, we have those petal or ray flowers here along the outside edges. And as they mature, you can see the openings to every single one of those tubes here. And collection is going to be very similar. We're going to collect those and shake them to extract those seed from those teeny tiny flowers. This is a fun one I threw in, still in the composite type family, but has a different organization, if you will, flower structure there. This is called Irish Poet Tassel Flower. And the way that it develops is very similar to, think of like a dandelion, the structure of a dandelion. As this beautiful small orange bloom begins to mature, we have these small seed held on top of that central disc. And then, of course, they have these wings that help them fly away. Okay, what about liatris or gay feathers, the common name for gay feather? I love this spike flower in my perennial bed. It adds a lot of texture and interest. But did you know that it is also a composite flower in the same family as a sunflower, coneflower, and all the others that we've talked about this morning so far in this group? So what strategies for harvesting seed on this plant? We want to wait until they dry out fully on this spike. This spike flower is unique in that it begins to flower at the top and then blooms progress to maturity as we go downward. So that's kind of opposite from the majority of our spike type raceme flowers. Think of like salvia would be a good example. But when you look closely, every one of these clusters here, like here's a puff cluster, here's a puff cluster, here's a puff cluster. Those are individual groupings of flowers that are held on a sessile on the stem. They don't have a pedicel like those umbels that we talked about. They're just clustered directly onto that stem. And when you give it a little agitation, those seeds dislodge themselves freely once they are nice and dry. So here's our seed. And then again, we have these attachments here on the end that help with dispersal. So that's a fun one and easy to collect. Okay, let's talk about some different types of spike flowers. So we're leaving composites, and now we're just kind of focusing on some different arrangements of flowers. And so we're going to look at a couple different types of spike flowers. The one we're looking at here is larkspur. This is a cool season annual for us, has beautiful blooms, and is a true raceme. So see how it begins, the first blooms open at the base of the spike and they progress upwards, which is backwards from the liatris that we just talked about. As these blooms mature, their seed pods are actually more like, I guess we could describe that as like a capsule. And as they become ripened, the end of that capsule will open up. And you can see there's kind of a seam that goes right down there through the center of that capsule. So these are super easy to collect. Those seeds are going to come out easily once they're mature and dry. So following that bloom back to where it attaches to the plant. Here's another good example of a spike flower, the salvias that we were just talking about. And a lot of folks don't know that you can collect seed from salvia, annual and perennial. But again, we've got to know where to look for those seeds and what do those seeds look like once we find them. So these small tubular flowers, this is the calyx that's left behind after the bloom falls off. And the seed is born right here at the base of that calyx. So imagine that the bloom was up here, right? So it got pollinated, things happened, the ovaries are here at the base. So we're going to need to look down into that calyx to find that seed. And I split one open right here, and you can see that little seed lying right inside the safety of that vase. Here's another good example. This is, well, I guess I didn't even mention what kind of salvia the first one was. This is White Flame. So it's a Farinaceae hybrid, kind of like it's got some genetics of mealy cup sage. The blooms kind of have that fuzzy texture to them. Really nice, tender perennial for us in West Tennessee. And then we have Amistad, which is a hardy perennial in most zones in Tennessee. Maybe not up on the plateau or when we get high elevations into the mountains. But for most parts, this is going to be a pretty reliable perennial salvia, nice purple blooms, darker purple calyx. So even when the blooms fall off, it's got some nice attractiveness there. But same strategy with finding the seeds on those. So here's that darker calyx right here. This is where that is on the actual plant. Can you see that? And so we follow that back, and there's our seed. Now let's look at a couple of fun, unique seed pods. So Love and a Mist is one of my favorite early spring annual bloomers, and I love to just let it reseed itself in my garden. But sometimes I collect these seeds and intentionally go out in the fall and put them in places where I want to have a little surprise pop up in the spring. And oftentimes I forget where I've put seeds throughout the season, and I am surprised about 50% of the time where things are popping up at. But this is its beautiful bloom. You can see here that it has many anthers, and we could only imagine how many ovaries we have at the base of that flower. You could actually come in here and count these different capsule areas. But as that seed pod begins to mature, it creates a neat little basket almost for those seeds. And as they ripen and completely dry out, the top of that seed pod begins to open. Each one of these capsules here kind of pops open, and that's its access for dispersal. This is another fun type of nigella or Love and a Mist. It's a Nigella siberica, and it has a little different flower shape, a little different type of seed pod structure, but the concept is the same. So that open capsule at the base, and then how it pops open at the top once they're ready. Oh, this is a fun one. So this is kind of a unique plant. It's called Aristolochia. This is a pipe vine, and it is the host plant for our pipe vine swallowtails. And so we have a lot of these at the UT Gardens in Jackson, and I love to harvest a couple of these little pods every year. But they're actually held kind of like a little purse by the plant. It has, you can't see them, but well, I guess you can kind of see them. Like there's a string here and here and here and here. At the top of each one of those pods is like a little string that is suspending this pod from that plant. And as the seeds begin to mature, the top opens up. And so it's like the purse is opening, and it bears these sweet little heart-shaped seeds right here on the inside. And then another good example of unique seed pod development that are super easy to harvest seed from would be our columbine, a perennial plant that we can certainly propagate ourselves. What about blackberry lily? So sometimes the blooms on blackberry lily are kind of insignificant, and folks don't even realize that they're out there until we get late into the summer and they see these really unique chartreuse papery seed pods. But then those pods split open and peel back to reveal the seeds on the inside, and which kind of look like blackberries. And so that's why the common name for this plant is blackberry lily. Those will be fun to collect. Okay, so now let's talk about some tips on how do we collect and clean seed. Number one, we need to make sure that the seeds are mature. Then we need to make sure that they are dry. Those are my two primary requirements. So let's start with talking about how do we know if a seed is mature. I'll preface this with saying most flowers will continue to ripen. Most seeds will continue to ripen after the flower is harvested, but the majority of them cannot continue to develop in maturity. So that's when I say the seeds need to be fully developed. It's okay if maybe they're not fully dry, because that's what we call the ripening process, okay? But those seeds need to be fully developed in order to have viable seed. I don't know if you've ever gone out and harvested, I wish I had a zinnia here to show you, and pulled apart the flower head of a zinnia and seen the white bases of the petals. When they are not mature, they are white. When they are mature, they are brown. And you can tell that they're forming like a papery edge along the edges of those zinnia seeds. So that would be a common flower that a lot of people may have in the garden. Another one is this Cosmos sulphureus that we're looking at right here. It's a beautiful plant, reseeds itself freely, and has a really unique seed arrangement. So as those petals begin to mature, the orange petals will fall off, and this is what we see. And you're like, oh, those are seeds. Well, I'm just going to go ahead and collect those. Yes, the seeds are there, but they are not yet fully developed. We can see that they have started, but we can also see quite a bit of green here still on those seeds. Now, this would be the perfect time to collect these seeds. We can see all that green from the image before has really dried down, turned papery. The seed cluster has actually opened up, began to spread itself out a little bit. That's a sign that things are ripening and drying down. And here, we can still collect the seeds here, but you can tell that a lot of those seeds have fallen off already. So, we've lost some to nature, and that's fine. I'm going to show you a couple tricks for helping to prevent that here in a second. But, it's super easy to go out and collect these. You can just use your bare hands and put it on top of a cluster and pull up. And then you've got a handful of these really trash-free seeds ready for storage or planting. So certainly we need to make sure that those seeds are mature. Know that they can continue to ripen, but they will not continue to mature once that bloom is removed from the plant. So are they dry? So they're going to need to be dry, because if we don't let nature help us with the drying part, guess what we have to do? We have to do it ourselves. It takes room inside. It takes space. It takes time. And, moisture is the number one enemy of seed savers. If you are going to be storing seed for any amount of time, those seeds need to be dry and they need to be clean. Okay. If we are direct seeding, if we're harvesting seeds and then going right back out and planting them right then cleaning is less important. But always, if we're storing them, we need to make sure that they are as dry as possible. So a couple of my favorite things to do is just go out into the garden with a paper bag, like you can see in this picture here. I've got one here. And I will just go out and cut several stems of, whatever plant it is. This is an example. I have celosia right here. I had 5 or 6 stems, and it's a mix. I like to be surprised again of the colors that are going to come up. So I go ahead and cut those stems. I pop them right into a bag while I'm outside in the garden, and I'll put a rubber band around them. Okay. Then I'll also try to label them, because I found that I always have good intentions with going outside and harvesting. But I don't always have time to sort and clean those seeds when I come back inside. So, take a marker with you, have a pocket full of rubber bands and an armful of paper bags. And if you get a really nice dry day, you can do a lot of seed collection at one time and kind of get that off of your list of things to do. Try to avoid harvesting seeds or even plants. Let me take that back. Sometimes I just go outside. Oh, I have a picture of that. Sometimes I just go outside and cut a bunch of stems and put them in a vase and bring them inside and use them for a little bit of decoration. They drop seeds here and there, so it does make a little bit of a mess. But sometimes I do that as well. So for plants that I know hold on to their seeds pretty well and don't shatter easily. So that could be another strategy, but we need to make sure that whether we're harvesting the actual stems or if we are harvesting the plants, I went too far back. If we're harvesting them to put inside these sacks, they need to be dry. So don't do it in the morning time while dew is still present. We want it to be nice and sunny and dry weather. And then once you get them in this bag, you can either take them inside to let them continue to dry out or mature a little bit. And then you can, when you get ready to sort them, give them a good thrashing. Okay, give them a good shake. My bag has a hole in it, and I sent seeds flying everywhere. But give it a good shake, and that's going to help release those seeds, especially from the ones that I showed you that had those capsules, right? The capsule shaped flowers, or vase type flowers. That's going to be a really easy strategy to use, and it's fun for the kids. They'll like to help give those bags a shake to get the seeds out. Okay, another option we have is to use these little organza or mesh type bags. So sometimes I will go ahead, I'll identify a flower that I want to harvest seed from. I can tell that it's not quite developed or ready yet, but it's getting close, and I don't want those seeds to fall off before I have a chance to get back out there again. I'll pop these bags over that bloom, tight at the base, and just leave that out in the garden. It's mesh, so it's breathable. It's going to dry. It's not going to hold moisture. It's going to allow that seed pod to continue to mature because it's still attached to the plant. So we still have, maturation happening and drying down happening as well. And then I don't have to be concerned if, I forget to go out there for a few days. That can be helpful. And this is a good example. In this picture, I've got milkweed in there. Everybody knows milkweed will pop open, and those seeds will be gone before you know it. So making sure that you get a couple of those preserved will relieve some stress for you. All right, once we've got those seeds collected and brought indoors, let's talk about tips for cleaning. Remember, I said it's not so important to clean your seed perfectly if you are going back out to direct sow those seeds in the garden. But if we are trying to do indoor seed germination, or we're going to save those seeds for any amount of time, we really need to try to clean that trash out of those seeds, because that's just going to help us know that moisture levels are as low as possible, which are going to help us keep our seed viable for longer. Okay, so these are some tools I like to use. I've got a collection of different size mesh screens here that can help with cleaning out trash sometimes. I do like to use them occasionally, especially for plants that have larger seeds, because I can, when I put them in my paper bag, I can really rough that bag up to crush up any trash that might be in there. And then when I pour it out through the sieves, it will allow the trash to fall through, but retain the larger seed in the top of the sieve. So that can be helpful. But when we have flowers that have teeny, teeny, tiny seed, the seed in this flower are these itty bitty specks here that you see, and the trash is larger, these seeds do not do much for us. So I'm going to show you another little strategy for attempting to clean some of that debris from, or we'll call it, seed collectors call it chaff. So you may hear that trash or chaff is what we're trying to get rid of. So I like to use these styrofoam trays and give them a little rub with my hand before we get started. Oh, let me show you like this. So that helps build up the static cling that's happening here on that surface. I'll pour my seeds on and then slowly tap that board. Sometimes I get a little too antsy and I tap too hard and everything dislodges. But if you can be patient and tap, 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 you can see these larger, heavier pieces of chaff fall away. The smaller seeds cling to the board. Sometimes this is reverse. Sometimes the seeds are heavier, the seeds roll away, and the chaff sticks to the board. So it just depends on what seed we're handling and dealing with. But this is what we ended up with for this particular flower. It's not perfect, but this is my seed collection. This is what I will be saving and storing, and this is chaff that we'll get rid of. So that would have made a huge difference in the potential viability of my seed if I had stored all of this together in a mixture. So it is very important. Took a little video of some larger seed. This was Celosia, I think. I built up the static electricity before I started. There wasn't a ton of trash here, and you can see these seeds are pretty heavy. But just be patient. I was getting antsy. You hear me tapping it with one finger. Tap, 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 tap. And here we go. So there's a few seeds left on here, but I would rather have a few seeds left in my trash than a bunch of trash left in my seeds. And then let's talk for a minute about storage. For short-term storage, that means we're storing them through this dormant season, the fall and winter, and we plan on planting them in the next growing season. Just making sure that the seeds are dried down as well as possible, then put in a breathable paper packaging. We don't want to store seeds in plastic, any kind of plastic container where condensation has potential to build. We live in a very humid climate, so that is a real possibility. We store them in a breathable envelope or container, put them somewhere that is dark and cool and preferably has low fluctuations between humidity levels, and those seeds are going to have retain some good germination rates for you for the following season. If we're looking at long-term storage, we're not going to plant them next year, or we don't plant them all. We could look at cold storage, but there's a whole nother set of risks involved with that. And we could have a whole nother talk just on seed storage to really learn the ins and outs about that. And so maybe we'll do that one day. But for now, plan on short-term storage, and the seeds that you don't use, dispose of them and collect fresh seed for your crop for the following year. So this, like I said, is one of my favorite topics. I hope that you have learned a lot today. And if you have any questions, please feel free to email those to me. My email is cscott52@utk.edu. I wish I could have been with y'all in person so we could have a whole Q&A session, because we always get tons of questions at the end of this topic. But I wish you all a happy end of summer as we enter into fall, and hope that you all try to harvest some seed from plants that you've never attempted to save seed from before. Have a good day. Bye.